It was a study conducted by the White Sands Missile Range and also the Air Force people, and including the Atlantic Research Corporation, that was under contract with the Air Force to be launching these test vehicles to produce these reentry phenomena. Now, the reason for the validity of flying missiles over land had been established prior to that, back in 1950, I guess, 3 or 4, with the concept of White Sands had the potential of being a launch site for missiles flying over land over very, very light population densities up to the northwest corner of the United States, up to and including Alaska.
And are there other launch complexes that had as long of a flight corridor during this period over land?
Not during that period. The first overland firings we had at White Sands was in '63 from, and that was the Sergeant missile that was fired from the plains of San Agustin in New Mexico, which essentially is where the NASA's large array radars are. And that was to fire missiles from west to east trajectory to check the Coriolis effect, that is, the spinning of the Earth versus the navigation and system of the missile. That was the first one. And then in 1963, also the Pershing 1A started, and that was another launch system requirement that was established at various points outside of the boundaries of White Sands, starting with McGregor here at Fort Bliss, Texas, firing north, and then from Fort Wingate near Gallup, Arizona, New Mexico. Then the longer ranges were to be fired from Blanding in Utah, which is about maybe 100 miles south and a little east of Green River.
So it sounds like this was a pretty, as far as the length of the corridor, that it was pretty rare, pretty long for the overland flight coming out of Green River.
Yes, it was. It was close to 500 miles and a little less. But nevertheless, it was still a sensitive issue because we would have to have boosters dropping into areas downrange from the launch point, in addition to the payload impacting in a dispersion zone that could possibly be outside the boundaries of the missile range. And the safety issue was the predominant thing. So that's the way we handled it. So we had 2 or 3 different off-range co-use areas that we leased by agreement with the landowners for evacuation during the missile firings.
And talk to us a little bit about the studies before the Utah Launch Complex in Green River was selected. You were looking at, you touched on this briefly, you were looking at things like population density and what else?
We had the concept. It was early in 1945, in fact, when the missile range was first established. It was surveyed, and the boundaries were outlined by one of the directors of the development of White Sands, Mr. Herb Karsh. And he had a registered land surveyor, Mr. Charles Brink. And in 1945, they were looking at a map of the United States with the size of White Sands on it and the amount of real estate that they had just identified to be later known as White Sands Proving Ground. Then they realized that, gee whiz, they have a long-range potential to fire missiles within White Sands of 100 miles. So then they just realized by looking at a map of the United States that the areas to the north and west was very, very low in population density. And so the concept caught on, and we decided to just look into it a little different, more deeply. So we actually went out and surveyed potential impact areas, not as launch areas, but impact areas of 100, 150, 200, 250, 500 miles up into Alaska. And not only did we just identify the areas because of the low population, but we actually sent survey teams to count people. And we counted railroads and utilities and communications and airspace and all of these things that would assist us in feasibly considering those areas for co-use with the landowners and business owners for possible use later on. Yes, it wasn't a pipe dream, but it was something that was conceivable, and it was studied, and very well studied. And little did we know that it would become a reality.